Hi, welcome to StatStuff. I'm Matt Hansen. In this lesson, we'll review the lean concept of identifying value-added and non-value-added steps within a process. There are no prerequisites for this lesson, so now let's start to define and compare the difference between what's value-added and non-value-added.
First of all, what does value-added and non-value-added even mean? Well, in this context, when we're talking about value, we're talking about that which the customer is willing to pay for. So as an example, value is anything that enhances the product or whatever's flowing through the process. It's enhanced to meet the customer's requirements. Now, in the opposite way, the opposite is waste. That is, any step within the process that does not enhance the product or whatever's flowing through the process. It helps it not meet the customer's requirements. So how do we categorize these different steps between value-added and non-value-added? Well, for value-added, those are the steps in the process that add value. Again, they're something that's defined by the customer's requirements. Non-value-added, again, are the steps that do not add any value. They do not do anything to help meet the customer's requirements. Now, there is another one that's non-value-added but required. These are the steps in the process that don't add any value to the customer, but for some reason they are required for the manufacturer, or they're required as part of the process. So here's some examples. Basically, like any step that might help the process conform to safety or government regulations, or any step that might help preserve financial integrity, like internal controls, or any step that might help prevent future waste, like if we're doing documentation or audit trails. All those things that maybe the customer is not willing to pay for, it's not a part of the requirements, but they're still necessary. So what do you do when you actually looking at a process and you find value-added steps? Well, I recommend that you explore those opportunities to eliminate any waste or defects that touch those value-added processes. Anything that touches it, you need to try to remove those as much as possible. For example, you can look at the 7 deadly wastes, or you can try to add some measurements for measuring quality or timeliness to the process. Apply those measurements to the value-added steps themselves. Those kinds of things could be done when you find those value-added steps in a process. But what do you do when you find something that's a non-value-added step in a process? Well, when it's non-value-added but required, I would validate that those are really something that's truly required, or validate the level of requirement and treat them like a value-added step. Even though, again, they may not be adding any value for what the customer is paying for, they should still be treated like a value-added step simply because they're required. But for anything that's truly wasteful, that is, again, it's a non-value-added step and it's something that's not required, eliminate those as much as possible. But before you just eliminate them automatically, you need to first plan how you're going to connect whatever those surrounding value-added or non-value-added and required steps are, whatever it is that's surrounding that non-value-added step. So if you eliminate those steps, you've got to be careful that you don't change or be aware of any change that might occur in the cycle time or the takt time. Because you're eliminating that step, the process may become faster. As a result, you need to make sure you measure and account for that change in the overall time for that process, because it could have a difference in creating some other types of waste. Like it could help in creating some work in process or waiting. So it's important to at least try to measure and be aware of the impact those non-value-added steps are having if you were to eliminate them from the process altogether.
Alright, before we close this lesson, let's discuss how we can apply some of these concepts in a practical way.
What I'd like you to do is try to identify at least 3 different types of processes that you interact with on a regular basis, and ask these for each of them. That is, what are some of the value-added steps that you find within that process? And what criteria did you actually use to determine that those steps were value-added? Next, I would ask, what are some of the non-value-added but required steps within that process? And what is it that makes those particular steps required? And is there any opportunity to actually avoid or streamline the process? And then finally, what are some of the non-value-added steps you might find within the process itself? And if you were to remove those non-value-added steps, then how should any of those value-added steps that are before or after it, how should those be synced to ensure that there's no compromise in the actual flow through the process? And how would eliminating those particular non-value-added steps, how would that improve the overall process? For example, in terms of time or efficiency.
Well, that wraps up this lesson. Check out StatStuff.com for many more resources that can help you achieve powerful results. I'm Matt Hansen. Thanks for watching.